thank you, Matt, for talking to Greatest Hits Radio Dorset for this interview, which we're calling Leaders in Lockdown. Now, you, of course, are the Chief Executive of Dorset Council. So for our listeners, it might be nice to just explain a bit about your role, first of all. What does that mean?
Okay, great stuff. So I'm not an elected politician. I'm known as a chief executive or head of paid service. I guess I'm the most senior member of staff. So I lead the 4,500 colleagues that we've got who work for Dorset Council.
Excellent stuff. So in a moment, I'm going to be putting to you some questions that we've had from our listeners, residents in Dorset, looking at the impact that the pandemic's had on their lives and the areas of concern to them for the future. But first of all, I think it might be nice to set the scene. So how do you think Dorset's responded to this pandemic, and what shape do you think it's left the county in, and what shape has it left Dorset Council in?
Great stuff. Well, for everyone, it's been a really tough year, hasn't it? And we're coming up to that year since the first lockdown started. And in the first waves of COVID, I think Dorset saw much lower numbers of cases than other areas of the country. But in the wave since Christmas, we've also been hit really hard. And over 1,000 people have died from COVID in the whole of the Dorset area. That's Dorset Council and BCP Council. And everyone's lives, I think, have been affected in some way. So we're really aware that some families and individuals have been hit hard financially. We're working closely with colleagues within Citizens Advice to provide support, and with other voluntary agencies like Age UK Dorset. And we've been paying out millions of pounds in grants to local businesses throughout the pandemic to try and help keep them afloat. Hopefully, the easing of lockdown this summer will mean that businesses can get back on their feet and life can return to something nearer to normal. But of course, some of that reopening brings other challenges for our communities. And I just want to say here that our local communities across Dorset have been absolutely amazing throughout the last year. People have looked out for their neighbours, they've rallied around, they've volunteered. And I hope that's something that will continue into the future for Dorset. Financially, the council's taken a hit, even with the government funding that's been provided, and we're going to have to use our reserves to make up some of that difference. I guess that's what they're there for, a rainy day fund. Well, it's felt for many of us like it's been raining for quite a while during this pandemic, hasn't it? So Dorset Council, I think, has provided a good response to our community. We're grateful to the community who worked with us. But actually, as a council, we've been left with a bit of a legacy with the finance, but we'll get there.
Absolutely. So speaking of money, if we look at the economy, which is obviously a major talking point. So we've had a question in from Dave England. So he asks, what help will there be for local businesses and local employers in the future? And how will Dorset Council encourage people to shop local and support those local businesses?
Yeah, brilliant question, Dave. Thank you. And Dorset Council did a lot of work last summer with a big Shop Local campaign to encourage people to support local businesses, stay local, shop local. We made some temporary physical changes to the high streets across Dorset to make them safer, so people had that room to be socially distanced. And we arranged sitting out licenses for cafes and pubs, and we'll be doing the same again this year. But we're also working with the Dorset Local Enterprise Partnership. We're providing access to the e-commerce platform Shop Appy. Get that right, so people know what it is. So that's in Bridport, Sherborne, Wimborne and Gillingham, so that local independent retailers and other retailers can join that local shop app, so people can do order online from their shop and do click and collect and support their local independent traders. Really, really good. And obviously, we're constantly working with our partners in town and parish councils to secure funding to revitalise those town centres as they reopen after lockdown.
That's going to be so important. And you obviously, Dorset Council was fundamental in handing out, delivering so many government grants to support local people. How did that process go?
Well, it's not an easy process, I have to say, and the team behind that have been absolutely amazing. Usually they would be doing our council tax collections, handing out council tax grant business rates, and in the last year, they've also, on top of that, been delivering those grants to businesses. So we paid out £164 million in grants to local businesses. We've got, I think, the 5th largest allocation nationally of government funding that's been delivered to us since the pandemic began. So we've supported over 11,000 local businesses across Dorset, and we've had some really good positive feedback from them who've said that funding's helped them to survive a very difficult period. We've automated that as we've gone through the process, so they don't have to keep reapplying, so I've made it more efficient. So hopefully those businesses will be back up and running once COVID restrictions are eased. Some, of course, will not reopen. We recognise that because some businesses were perhaps not viable or on the edge of viability before the pandemic, and the lockdown perhaps exposed this. But many of them, with the support that's been provided, will come back and be stronger. And there's also, I know, many new businesses that have formed during the pandemic and have taken the opportunity to reshape their business model and take account of that. So I think Dorset will be in a good position, and we hope the support we've been able to provide has been useful.
Excellent. Yeah, lots of business have diversified, haven't they, and find unique ways of carrying on doing what they're doing. Nick Howlett asks, what plans are there to boost and support the hospitality industry in Dorset once lockdown ends?
Well, Nick, it's a really important sector to us across Dorset, along with tourism, and that hospitality piece is really important. And like last year, we won't be charging for sitting out licenses. This means that cafes and pubs, having applied, can get space for people to enjoy food and drink safely outside. So there's less risk of spreading the virus. As I say, they just need to apply for those licenses, and we won't charge for that. We're also investing in a new and improved Visit Dorset website to support the hospitality industry and the visitor economy. Including working with town and parish colleagues to create microsites to enable them to develop and promote their offer on a more local basis. And as I've mentioned before, we've paid out lots of money in grants to local hospitality businesses to help them survive. And that's on top of the ability for them to use national furlough money, for example, during the various lockdowns. So we've been talking to those businesses to see what help we can provide, and hopefully they'll bounce back well, as lots of people, I think, intend to visit Dorset this year.
It's going to be a balancing act, though, isn't it? Because as we slowly come out of this process, we want to open up to tourism, but at the same time, this virus isn't completely going away, is it? So how do we manage that?
Well, that's absolutely right, and that balance with opening up for tourism and managing the threat still posed by the virus is an important one, because we're responsible for public health. So we have the Director of Public Health, who a lot of people will have heard on radio and in pieces. Sam Crowe has done an amazing job with his team there. But that question about how we prepare for Dorset opening up for tourism, we've been looking at for many, many weeks now. It's an important part of our local economy. Many leisure and hospitality businesses, as we talked about, we're looking forward to getting back on their feet. But at the same time, we need to make sure we can closely follow the Public Health England guidance to reduce the spread of the virus and keep local residents safe. It's government's responsibility to decide when it's safe to ease the lockdown restrictions, and we'll take our lead from them. But of course, we did last year see some disappointing behaviour from a few visitors to Dorset. So we've got plans in place to try and tackle this this spring and summer, because local people were rightly upset about how Dorset was treated by our minority. We want to welcome responsible visitors to our beautiful coast and countryside. But we're prepared for that minority that won't follow the rules. For example, we're creating towaway areas for illegally parked cars and more civil enforcement officers, parking wardens. We've got more bins and waste collections coming in popular beauty spots. We're looking at volunteer ambassadors to welcome visitors to local beauty spots and historic towns to help them enjoy the area responsibly. And we're going to put in place some temporary bans on beach camping. These all came as feedback from local people who put complaints and suggestions through to us on how we could do things differently. We're obviously working with our partners, including the police, the Coast Guard, NHS locally, and visitor attractions, to make sure we've got the arrangements right for managing the high number of visitors we're expecting later this spring and summer, as soon as the easing has reached the next milestone on the roadmap from the government.
Excellent, thank you. Moving on to council tax, completely changing the subject. We've had lots of questions in about council tax. I know I've had my statement through the post. So you too. What would you say then to people? I mean, it's a difficult time. People have already been hit hard financially because of this pandemic. We are now being asked to pay a bit more for local services. Are we getting more for our money, or is this about a sustainability issue? Where are we with council tax?
Yeah, thanks, Maria. And it is a really important question. I know it'll be of interest to everybody listening. We understand that the last year has been challenging financially for many of our residents, and we want to support them. If you face redundancy, or you've got financial hardship as a result of being furloughed and not perhaps being paid your full salary, or you're not getting bonuses coming through, and you're struggling to pay your bills, then you may now be eligible for other support, such as council tax support. And would advise people to visit the council website on details of how to apply and search for that council tax support. But you might also be able to get other benefits from the system. And we also fund Dorset Citizens Advice to provide support and advice to residents who are experiencing financial difficulties or are feeling stressed or worried about that. And obviously we don't want our residents to feeling stressed about that. So we recognise that's a service. So there's a free phone number. It's 0800 144 8844. 8848. So 0800 144 8848. And I know colleagues in the CAB provide a fabulous service and fabulous support to people who just want to talk about some of the challenges they face. But listeners also perhaps need to understand that funding for local government is now heavily focused on council tax. So when the government talks about increasing the spending power of local government, much of that is around council tax. And each area is unique and has different levels of funding, as well as they have different levels of challenge. You know, one of our major challenges in Dorset is we've got a larger population of older people. And with that comes a great richness in our community in terms of what they contribute to that and volunteering, but also at some point can come higher costs of care when older people can no longer care for themselves. So you mentioned, are they getting more for their money? And I'm grateful for the opportunity to perhaps explain a bit about our finances and why council tax is increasing. I mean, one of the fundamental things is to remember that council tax is, as it says on the tin, it is actually a tax. It's not a charge for the services provided. That's a question I get from many people. I don't access this, this and this. And I have to remind people gently that actually it's a tax. It's not just about the cost of the services provided. And for me, it's what civil societies do to smooth wealth imbalances so that hopefully no one loses out. Government funding to councils, though, across the country has fallen by 60% since 2010, so in the last 11 years. Some other councils across the country continue to receive what we call revenue support grant from the government. But Dorset Council, for whatever reason, no longer does that. We get less income from business rates than councils in more urban areas say. And so that means we're heavily reliant on council tax to fund those local services. About 85% of our funding comes from local council tax. Whereas for some councils, that figure is much lower, sometimes as much as 20% lower. Like many, our finances also been hit hard by the pandemic. So we've got lots of extra expenditure for things like PPE, putting in place COVID secure arrangements, looking after our vulnerable, or we like to call them our valuable residents, and more. You know, we've also seen a reduction in the council's income from our car parks, from leisure services, business rates, and council tax collection. And although we've received significant additional funding from government for COVID, it's not been quite enough to cover those full costs to the council. So I guess one last thing for me is, you know, as many people might not realise, over half of our council spending goes on social care. So this is actually there to support our vulnerable children, those who are at risk of neglect or abuse, children with disability and adults with disabilities, and older people with significant and complex care needs. As I say, that's what I think a civil society should do. So the need for social care in our local population is growing every year. You know, we've got more older people, as I mentioned. We have 29% are aged 65 or over, which compares to 18% in England or 12% in London, for example. And every year at the moment, we've been seeing a growing number of children who've got special educational needs and disabilities, and we want to support them. You know, we've got a legal duty to support them. We to provide those vital services. We can't just turn people away in need because we can't afford it.
Thank you. So moving to the local plan and housing, another key topic for our listeners, particularly new homes. So William Pullman, there's a couple of questions on this. William Pullman says, why are Dorset Council considering building houses and flats on town centre car parks? I know that's been talked about in Weymouth, isn't it? And Jane Priory says, why build 4,000 new homes on a floodplain in a beautiful area people enjoy, looking towards the Dorset North development? So obviously Dorset Council's in a difficult position. You've been asked to build, I think, more than 30,000 new homes. What would you say to those two people? I guess it's a difficult balancing act because we live in such a beautiful area. There's no probably ideal place to put new homes. So what would you say to them?
It is a really good question. I know it's a really hot topic as we've come we've just closed the consultation on our local plan, which is a really important document for the future, for the next 10, 20, 30 years. You know, where and how will we build new communities? Where and how will we build new houses? Bearing in mind the council doesn't build houses themselves, we're just allocating the land within the plan. So around the question on car parks, you know, a handful of car parks have been named as possible sites for housing where we feel parking capacity is sufficient elsewhere in the local area. And again, this follows a general desire from residents for us to consider brownfield or previously developed sites before any others. So we've tried to do that. So car parks are counted as brownfield site, but it shouldn't be taken as an indication of that wider policy to remove car parks more generally. Motorists, we still know, need places to park, and the high street still needs all the help it can get in the wake of the pandemic. But of course, we have also declared a climate and ecological emergency, and we've got to weigh up that against, you know, future forms of transport. and parking and the need for spaces against that. So we're carefully considering that, but it's just one of the proposals for where we might build houses. And Jane's question about the 4,000 new homes on a floodplain. It's again, as you said, it's a really challenging question. The local plan has been out of public consultation over the last 8 weeks, and people have been commenting on that. And that local plan helps to decide where and how future development, such as housing, schools, roads, should take place across the county. The consultation closed earlier in the week, and we're going to be looking really carefully at what people said. And we know there have been lots of comments about that proposed North Dorchester development. But it is, as you quite rightly said, lots of people want to move to Dorset. We have lots of people who live here, work here, retire here. We also have people who want to move here and retire here. We also have people who move here to work, and we've got to provide accommodation for them. So we've got a responsibility to enable those new homes to be able to be built. And we know there's an issue in Dorset with many younger people struggling to get on the housing ladder due to a lack of affordable housing. And that's also one of our responsibilities, to make sure there's enough land for affordable development. Development is therefore really sensitive, particularly if it's in your local area. So we're going to continue to work with communities, our town and parish council colleagues and other organisations to see if we can find the best way forward. But satisfying everybody all of the time in a local plan is a really difficult job. But the key thing I think your listeners need to be aware of is that if we don't have that robust legal local plan that addresses those housing needs, we actually lose our ability to tell developers where they can and can't build. And it means that important key decisions of where development takes place in our county could be made by people outside of Dorset, by private property developers. So we do need to have a legal local plan in place, otherwise we lose that opportunity.
Thank you. Finally then, looking at the environment, Anne Smart asks, when is better public transport, better cycleways and safer routes for pedestrians going to be top of the agenda with a sincere commitment to climate change? What would you say to Anne?
Well, great, Anne, thanks for the question. Anne, I'm sure we're aware, we adopted a climate and ecological emergency. We've been going through putting the strategy in place, and we've recently been awarded a significant amount of money from the government. I'll talk a bit about that in a second. But we're committed to tackling that climate and ecological emergency. We've got the strategy and action plan for this. It includes improving cycleways and pedestrian routes. I don't know where Anne comes from in Dorset, but in the east of the county, we're working with our colleagues in Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council on an exciting £79 million project to improve travel infrastructure and encouraging more walking, cycling and use of public transport. And that's where links go in and out of the conurbation for work or for leisure. We've also just installed a number of new electric vehicle charging points across the council area, and more are coming soon. That's a good one for me as an electric car driver. And we've also recently, as I said, we've secured just under £19 million from government to help the council become carbon neutral by 2040. And that's by improving the energy efficiency of buildings. And so I would say that tackling climate change is absolutely a priority for us, and helping our communities to be able to adopt those better ways of travel and more mindful ways of doing that is really, really important.
Excellent. Matt, thank you. Any final message then, as a leader in lockdown, to the people of Dorset? Anything final you'd like to say?
Well, I was just reflecting. So yesterday was the 16th, wasn't it, of March for when we're doing this recording, and that was the first indications we got the lockdown was coming. And I sent 1,250 staff to work from home that day. By the following Monday, when we went into full lockdown, the 23rd of March last year, I had 2,554 colleagues working on the end of a bed, at a kitchen table, around a dining room table, a desk if they had one, still continuing to provide services to the population of Dorset. I think Dorset as a population has been absolutely brilliant, and I'm so delighted that we've been able to work with them to help support them through this really challenging pandemic, and we'll continue to help support them as we come out of it through lockdown.
Fabulous stuff. Thank you. Matt, thank you. Chief Executive Dorset Council, thank you for taking part in Leaders in Lockdown.
Thanks, Maria.